right?
I mean,
Podcasting's not different than any other business.
the worst thing that can happen is they tell you no.
Right.
I I've landed guests that I felt like I had no business landing, and it was just a simple message. One of them, it was literally a tweet that I just tagged them in. I was talking to someone else and tagged them in the tweet, and they replied and they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." I was like, "Oh, holy cow! All right, let's do it."
Hi, I'm Erin Marcus, former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Conquer Your Business. Welcome to the Ready Yet podcast. We're excited to bring you more than 100 episodes of interviews and insights designed to help entrepreneurs get the financial and emotional freedom they need in order to build a business and a life they're proud of.
Welcome to this episode of the Ready Yet podcast. And I'm excited because today we're going to talk about podcasts, right? Sounds a little existential, but here we are. So I met Nick Nalbach literally through a podcast platform, right? And ended up having a great conversation. We had to stop ourselves even now as we were reconnecting to say, wait a minute, we should be recording this for everyone. So before we get into all things podcast and entrepreneurial journey, why don't you give everybody a more formal introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Nick Nalbach, and I got into podcasting as a way to attempt at building another business. I started the typical career path everyone says you need to go down. You go to college, get a career.
Yep.
It wasn't for me, and I was like, I need to figure something else out. I need to build something of my own. Like that's what's really going to make me happy. That's what's going to give me the freedom to come and go as I please. Type of,
Yep.
it's all on me, and that was several years of trying different things, experimenting, testing different business ideas, and I finally just decided to start a podcast on a whim and just fell in love with it. And it actually
What
wasn't
was that
until
one about?
the podcast.
Yeah.
So it's an entrepreneur podcast. It's called the 9-5 podcast.
Nice.
And the whole idea was to interview entrepreneurs, the ones who have been in the situation that I'm in. How do I get out of a 9-to-5 job and build something of my own? And if I can talk to people who have already been there, they can give me all the secrets and everyone who's listening.
And yeah, the secret is really easy. Just do it.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing? Like it's really not that it's not complicated. It ain't easy, but it doesn't have to be more complicated
Yeah.
than just
Absolutely.
doing something, which is funny because so what we were talking about before we hit record, when we decided, wait a minute, more people need to hear this, is that now you have a business that teaches the business of podcasting.
Yes.
And I had made the comment that I'm probably the antithesis to most of what you teach. Because if it was as simple as all that, it wouldn't be a business, right?
Yeah. Oh, and that's exactly how I started too. I just basically winged it, looked up a couple things on YouTube and Google, and just went for it. And now looking back on, I was like, man, I could have done a lot of things differently and correctly that would have put me light years ahead of where I'm at now. So I made a lot of mistakes along the way. So my goal is to help people avoid those mistakes and get started on the right foot.
Lessen the learning curve. And I think, one of the things we talked about is, and I say this about everything as I help my clients, is the need to know what it is you're trying to do in order to figure out what the right thing to do is. Right. So what I mean by that is the reason we kept my podcast simple was the goal of my podcast was for networking, for me to meet new people. It was a tool. I mean, it's a credential. Don't get me wrong. It secondarily is a credential. But my number one goal was to meet new people who otherwise had no reason to speak to me.
Right. Absolutely. And that's something I think you definitely did right at the beginning. Like you thought about it in that lens, because I think a lot of people see podcasting, they see the Joe Rogan podcast, they see all these that are making just tons of money, and they're like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and get rich.
Right. Well, that's just like saying I'm gonna go be a life coach and start at where Tony Robbins is now.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't work that way.
Yep. And the more I realized as I was getting into podcasting was like, man, before I started the podcast, I was doing blogging. I was not doing well in video. And I was like, I couldn't have conversations with people. And everybody that you talk to is like, oh, build the relationships, hang out with the people that you want to emulate and learn from. I was like, I can't get any kind of room
No
with
one
any of these
will talk
people.
to me.
Exactly. But as soon as I started a podcast, I was a couple episodes in, and all of a sudden I'd ask, "Hey, I have this podcast. I'd love for you to be on." It's like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, this is
Well,
more than just a place for me to talk. It's a place for me to connect."
100%. And so in my journaling and in my life goals and in all of the things I do to set my stage every day, one of the things that I noticed, and I don't even know that I realized what it was at the time, you put things out there not knowing what it'll actually manifest as. But one of the things that I knew is that my world as an entrepreneur shifted when I was able to get on somebody else's platform. Right. And it didn't start out with a podcast. It started out with speaking. When I was given the opportunity to speak on someone else's stage, whether that was at a chamber event, whether that was at an entrepreneur event, whatever it is, building a stage is brutally difficult.
Mhm.
Getting on someone else's stage is a little easier. And so as I put my big life goals and things together, I knew that not only did I want to help entrepreneurs, but I wanted to create a platform to do that.
Right.
And little did I know, going back to your comment about building a relationship, that creating the podcast platform is one of the things that I can do. It helps me by networking, but it's of service, build a relationship by giving a platform to people who might not have one.
Yes. Yeah. It's so cool. And I think the first thing everyone thinks about is like, okay, how do I find sponsors? And my whole mindset on it now is like, how do I use podcasting to build relationships, to network, to talk to the people, ask the questions I have? Like my podcast, I went into it, up front was saying, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to go talk to the experts and we're going to
Right.
get the answers. And they're answers for me, they're answers for anybody who wants to listen. And that is so cool. There's no other platform that kind of gives you that access to people. I could have the same conversation with someone and pay $10,000 to have that
Right.
conversation.
I
But now I
know,
have a
right?
platform.
They'll just answer your questions right here, right? Totally. And I think I don't know why, but there is definitely something a little bit easier about this platform than maybe straight video. I like to do this on video as well as the audio because I can then see the other person and it just makes my job easier. I think I do a better job when I can see the other person. But it has been an absolute amazing opportunity to build, like I said, and I don't always recommend, I recommend to my clients, if you're just starting out, don't start a podcast, get on other people's podcasts, because it's a lot of work to be consistent, to do it as right as I'd say right, but whatever right looks like at the moment, whatever right feels for you at the moment. So before you get yourself bogged down, start out by being on other people's podcasts. But it is a credential the way speaking is.
Mhm.
But to me, it's also, interestingly enough, it's more audience nurturing than audience building.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would say more of the audience building that I've had personally has come from social media
Right.
where I end up directing them to the podcast. And then
Exactly.
that's where they stick around.
And to your point, how do I get sponsors? Why aren't I making any money? Well, it is more of a nurturing. It's more of a reconnecting with the people who know you
Mhm.
than it is finding new people.
And I like to think of podcasting almost as like its own business. And that's where I think a lot of people tend to get it wrong. Yes, it can make you money, but there's marketing that goes into the podcast in order to get people to find it. There's like the additional tools and software and stuff like that. So you have accounting and finances and stuff to think about. How are you going to generate leads from the podcast? Like there's all of
Right.
these different aspects that in a way make it its own business. And people just think it's going to be like a money funnel where they're just going to find you from the podcast and they're just going to pump money into it. And that's usually never the case.
No more than any social media is the case.
Yeah.
I say the same thing about social media. Unless you do something intentional about it, your social media is a credential, not a sales funnel.
Mhm.
Right? Like if I were to meet you, even if we would have met in person, the first thing you do is like, is Nick a real person? I don't know. Let me check. Does he have a Facebook profile? Is he on Instagram? I just met him, but is he really a person? Let me go check his gram. You know, it's so weird that we do that, but it's a credential to support what you build in a relationship otherwise.
Mhm.
And podcast is a great credential for if you're becoming an author, becoming a speaker, you're trying to get booked in places. Oh, look, she's been on all these podcasts. Yeah, I'll bring her in.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually, a previous episode of mine, I was interviewing a guy and he primarily worked with authors. And he
Mhm.
said between writing a book and hosting a podcast, there are really no other better opportunities than establish your expertise and credibility. People can, if you write a book, you might have people line up at your door saying, "Hey, I want you to come speak about what you talked about in the book." Same thing with the podcast. You start putting out podcast episodes, you start showing up on other podcasts. People are like, "Oh, this person is putting in the work. They mean business. Let's get them on and talk." Like so many doors of opportunity open up because of that. And I completely agree. It's definitely a credential and expertise builder.
Yeah. So what are you seeing different now? I mean, you've been doing this for a while. What are you seeing different now than when you started?
Video is definitely making a bigger stance.
Everyone told me I was nuts to do it that way, but I needed the visual cues to have a good conversation.
Well, and I went into it because I actually, before I started podcasting, I was attempting to do video and like long form video. I was like, I'm going to build a YouTube channel. Like that's what I need to do because I wanted that, like the connection with the audience. And it was so brutal.
It's
I would set everything up. I know exactly what I want to say, but then I just freeze and there's no reason for it. And that's when I was like, you know what? Let's do audio. I'm going to do a podcast instead. People don't have to see me. They don't have to see how red I'm getting, like how terrible it's going to be.
My eyes are white. Yes.
But
Crying.
yeah, exactly. But I did go into it. I was like, I'm not going to just do audio. Like I'm going to film the conversations. I'm going to have this face to face, like we're doing through Zoom,
Mhm.
because I don't want to lose that content. I don't want to get to episode 100 and be like, I'm going to do video now and be like, wow, I could have had 100 episodes worth of content to be posting, and now I'm starting at 0.
Totally agree. If it's no harder to collect more, why not just collect more? Better to have it and not use it than want to use it and not have it.
Exactly. But I've seen a lot of platforms now. Spotify offers an ability to upload
Oh, really?
video. Yeah, I think it's only through Anchor. I think you have to be hosted with Anchor in order to do it. Apple's starting to do that as well. And now, just recently, as of the podcast movement event, YouTube announced their podcasting space within YouTube. So
Oh, nice.
video
I
is
know
becoming
we
a
always
huge element.
posted the videos on YouTube and the highlight reels. Our most popular social media posts are the 1 and 2 minute clips we're able to grab from the podcast recordings.
Yeah, no, I've seen a mix of strategies, like posting the full episodes, posting clips. Some people will do clips and full episodes.
We've been
It's-
trying to do the live stream. That's
Oh
interesting.
yeah, I've seen some people be really successful with the live stream aspect of it.
Yes.
And obviously it's more video heavy, but they'll post it as a podcast episode as well.
Mhm.
And I think I can't remember the exact stat, but there's over 50% of podcast listeners actually listen on YouTube, which is pretty surprising. So that's got me thinking over the last couple of weeks is like, okay, how do I do a podcast interview that's interesting enough to keep someone's attention? Because that's the biggest struggle with someone on YouTube is like they're watching something and they can easily get distracted and go somewhere else.
Well, and I think so that's just marketing, right? That's marketing 101. And it's about not trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
But your people, and it's also this whole idea of abundance, because my people who I'm meant to help will be interested and everyone else won't. And that's perfect.
That's how it should be.
Right. That's perfect. That's not a problem. That's the goal. But it takes a long time to be okay with that. Like, I've had to pay people money to be able to sit here and say, I don't have to be all things to all people. There's a lot of people I can't help, and that's okay. Right. Yeah. That's a process.
Yeah. And that is a struggle. I mean, through the business or even podcasting in itself is like you're creating a show for a very specific person.
Yes.
And they're going to resonate with the stories you're telling, but it's not going to be everybody. There's going to be someone who's in the exact same seat that you are right now, and they're going to love everything that you're saying, and others that are like, I could take it or leave it. And that's perfectly
and
fine.
others
You want those people that are raving fans.
Right. And others who outrightly don't like you. Right. It's not even neutral. It's not.
Yeah, we get that.
I heard something, and it's so true. I'll tell you this as a word of warning as yours grows and does all the cool things. How did it go? They ignore you at the bottom, they judge you in the middle, they hate you at the top. Like, yay, and this is what we're choosing to do. Great.
Intentionally putting ourselves in that position.
Yes, exactly.
Love what you're learning here and interested in more? Check out conqueryourbusiness.com to get immediate access to all sorts of additional resources and stay updated on our upcoming training events.
So if someone was getting started, what do you like? What are some, my favorite thing, let's shorten people's learning curves here. If you do nothing else except what I did, like, don't do what I did, you're already ahead of the game, right? What are some do's and don'ts you would give people for being a guest and or starting their own podcast?
Yeah. So I guess starting with being a guest on other podcasts, it doesn't have to be difficult. There's tons of platforms out there. Podmatch, I think that's where we actually connected. That's a great one. Wildcast is another one that I really enjoy. It's basically like a matchmaking service for podcasters and guests. And you can literally go on there, find people that are talking about the thing that you're an expert in or that you enjoy talking about, and just shoot them a message and say, hey, it's that simple. But as far as being a guest, like, you definitely want to come into that leading with value. So if you're someone who has a business, you're trying to grow that business, podcasting can be a great way to do that. You don't want to go in there and start pitching and selling all of your stuff. No one likes that.
No.
The host isn't going to appreciate it. The listeners aren't going to appreciate it. But
it's not going to work. So you're not going to appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly. So going in there, leading with value, thinking about how can the listeners gain something from this. The host is going to love that because it's going to build credibility for them. Like, I brought this guest on, they brought a bunch of value, and also they helped me along the way as well as the listener. So I really don't like to pitch a whole lot in a podcast at all. It's just, how can I help the host, the listener, everything? That I think as a guest, that's like the most important thing you can do. Just provide value.
Totally.
As a host, as simple and cliche as it sounds, the only thing you can do is start.
Yeah.
And you don't have to spend a lot of money. I'm super into techie stuff. Like, I don't know
if you can tell. This blue snowball mic has gotta be 6 years old at this point. And I was gonna be cool and have headphones, but they didn't my headphones are so old they don't plug into my new Mac. So no headphones. So there's a dog barking, and there's just gonna be a dog barking.
But I went into it thinking like, okay, I need all these things. I need to sound professional. I was listening to podcasts and I was thinking, if I'm going to start a podcast, that's what I have to sound like. I have to sound like someone who's been doing it for 10, 11 years and their production quality. They probably have teams doing it all
Came
for
out of
them.
radio and right.
Yeah. And you can literally start with your phone. You can
Oh,
download Anchor.
that would be even simpler than how we started if
Yeah.
I would have just used the phone. I always make fun of our podcast efforts because we've done a great job. We've hit some amazing milestones. I've met some amazing people, and we started out with a half-dead laptop, a 6-year-old's blue snowball mic, a ring light, and the free GarageBand tech that comes on a Mac. And thankfully, my assistant's brother had a podcast, so he taught us how to use GarageBand. Like, that was it.
And I mean, there are some very successful podcasts that literally run everything through GarageBand. It's as simple or as difficult as you want to make it. And I say start as simple as possible and see what you think of it.
Right.
I know when I started, I was super nervous. The first 2 interviews I did, one was with my brother, and then the next one was with my wife's cousin.
You
Those are my
start
first 2
start with people who will cooperate with you.
Yeah, exactly. They probably feel bad, so they're going to come on.
And they won't be mad if you say, you know what, we're not going to air this.
Right. But what I found, like once I got like 5-10 episodes in, I started figuring things out. So if you go back and listen to those first couple episodes, they sound terrible. I probably sound
won't
scared
listen
and
to mine.
awkward. And it just, you kind of find a groove. But
Yeah.
if you're someone who's never done video, you've never been behind a mic or done speaking or any of that stuff, it can be super intimidating and scary to get into. But you're never going to get over that unless you take those first steps. You have to struggle to get better.
Right, because you can't think your way into getting better. The only way to get better at the thing is to do the thing.
Yep, exactly. And it makes sense. Like a story I like to tell, I guess it's not really a story, but kind of more of a analogy, metaphor. When you're younger, you're trying to figure things out, you're learning, you're screwing up, you're falling down, you're getting back up. You don't care. It doesn't matter. You're just going to keep doing it. And eventually you get better at these things and you don't think anything of it. And then now as adults, we jump into something new and we fall down and we're like, oh, who saw that? Like, I can't do this anymore because people are watching.
And I have to say, I don't know where this came from. I really don't know where this came from. But I'm totally comfortable having no idea what I'm doing.
I mean, that's a good place to be.
It's not unusual for me to decide to go do something that I have no idea what I'm doing. This is kind of one of my natural places. So.
I mean, I would kill for that.
When I'll tell you this part, when I was 40 years old and I left corporate to start my own entrepreneurial journey and was so overwhelmed from the stress of it all, I knew I had to go do something to keep my mind off of it. And going to the gym wasn't enough because I had been a competitive powerlifter since I was 19 years old. So being in the gym my mind could wander even when I was lifting really heavy because I'd been doing it for so long. So at 40 years old, looking for something physical in nature to take my mind off of the stress, I decided to learn how to figure skate.
Oh, wow.
Like, you could kill yourself doing that when you're 40. It's not like when you're 8 years old. And by the end of the year, having no idea what I was doing, I found myself I won a blue ribbon. I won first place in an adult beginner skating competition.
No way. That's awesome.
Totally true. Doing a 90-second, yes, there's a video, no, I won't show you. It's a landslide by Fleetwood Mac. Right?
Oh, nice. All right, everyone listening, your mission is to go find that video.
It's on this half-dead laptop. It barely functions. But seriously, like, this whole idea, just switch subjects a little bit, of the idea of get uncomfortable being uncomfortable. It's not get uncomfortable being uncomfortable until you feel comfortable again. It's staying uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Asking a guest who you don't think you have a chance at landing. So this is my next podcast effort. I am creating, see what you think about this idea as the actual expert instead of me just making it up as I go along. My in fact, the meeting is on the calendar for a week or two from now. The way you build like a ideal 100 client list, I'm creating an ideal 100 podcast guests and podcast shows so that I could market the way I do for clients to get where I want. Like, how do you move up? Like, you see the things that kids do where they trade up and see, you start out with a paper clip and you end up with like a boat or something.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do for podcasts.
That's a legitimate strategy. I've seen people do that where I think, oh man.
Like, if I could get the low end of the medium people, then I could start working towards the medium of the medium people. And then I could, right? Like,
Right, exactly. I think it was Gary Vanderchuck. They had this new podcast. They really wanted to interview Gary, and they started with like an intern at VaynerMedia or something like that.
Who do you know? Who do you
Interviewed
know?
him,
Who do you know?
and then just kept working his way up until finally they impressed him enough to say, "Hey, I would love an opportunity to talk with Gary if you'd be interested." And they're like, "Yeah, let's set it up." Boom. And
And you can't do that if you're worried about looking like an idiot, being uncomfortable, having someone say no over and over and over again.
yeah,
Right?
I mean,
Podcasting's not different than any other business.
the worst thing that can happen is they tell you no.
Right.
I've landed guests that I felt like I had no business landing, and it was just a simple message. One of them, it was literally a tweet that I just tagged them in. I was talking to someone else and tagged them in the tweet, and they replied and they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." I was like, "Oh, holy cow. All right, let's do
I
it."
did the same thing. I was at a presentation in downtown Chicago, and this high-end doctor who's now an international high-end women's fashion shoe designer gave a presentation that I really enjoyed, not to mention the shoes. And I went up and talked to her afterwards and like, "I'd love to interview you." And she said yes. Like,
And I
cool.
mean,
Now what happens, right?
yeah,
Like, wait a
and
minute.
you didn't expect the yes. I think that's a big
No.
part of it too, is going in there expecting it and being disappointed when it's a no. But when you're going in there, you have no expectation. I'm just going to send this DM. I'm just going to approach this person. And if they say no, that's fine. I'm going to go find another guest to be on the show.
Right.
Maybe I'll try again in a year. Or who knows? Maybe you end up connecting with their assistant and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you'd have the perfect show for this person to
other
come
one.
on."
I know. Right. Exactly. So how can we lessen people's learning curves? What would you tell them not to do?
Not to do.
Besides wait. Getting ready to
Yeah.
be ready to get ready.
Right. Yeah, that's the big one. I would say not marketing, not sharing what you've done. There's ways that you can get the podcast found organically, and you can get super technical SEO and all that type of stuff, but it's your show. Like, be proud of your show and be willing to share it with the world. Send it to friends. And I just see so many people that don't actually market, and they're like, "Why isn't my show growing?" Or why aren't they building connections with people on social media? Like, that's what I've found more recently, is the more conversations I'm starting on social media, the more people are starting to care when I post about the podcast. They're like, "Oh, I want to listen to that."
Now they have a relationship with you.
Exactly. So
Those headphones that I told you don't work, the dog decided to eat them. This is why I don't have tech. It's not my fault. It's the dog's fault.
so definitely don't just post and ghost and expect things to happen.
I love that.
It's, I don't know. I was listening to a previous episode you were doing with Paige Stapleton.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
it was.
I love her.
And you used the term insta hacks.
Insta
like,
hacks, insta tactics, insta
Yeah,
tactics.
insta tactics.
That's my
what it is.
word. I
Yes.
made it up. I made it up.
And I like that, because that's, everyone's scrounging the internet. I did the same thing when I launched the podcast. I was like, what are the shortcuts, the cheap little tricks that I can use to bring in a bunch of people?
As
And
soon as
it doesn't
you
work.
hear that, it's a lie.
Right.
As soon as you hear the words, "just do this one thing," run the other way. If it
Yeah.
was that easy, everyone would do it.
And I found a lot of times that'll work once you made it to a certain level.
Yes.
That's what drives me nuts, is like, coaches are like, "Just do this."
Yeah,
It's like,
once
okay,
you
that
have a
makes
million
sense.
followers
Yeah, it makes
and
sense
a
for
team,
you.
right? Well, and that's my big thing, and I use ClickFunnels, so I'm not against ClickFunnels. I use the whole concept of funnels, but the idea of I just sent this one funnel and made $1 million. Yeah, but
You
you
had
sent
no
a
audience.
million funnels and made $0 for 20 years, right?
Right.
Doesn't work that way. Doesn't, yeah, the overnight success 10 years later, right?
Hmm.
Exactly. Do the work. Don't be afraid of the work, I guess. Don't be afraid of the work. I
Yeah.
think
And
that, and that's a byproduct of the fact that we all have such shorter lifespan, attention spans, not lifespans, but that too, from what I read in the news, shorter attention spans. And
Yeah.
I'm the worst. I have no attention span.
I think with podcasting specifically, I can't remember the exact stat now because I'm sure it's changed, but I know at the beginning of the year there was something like maybe it was just 2 million podcasts worldwide. And of those 2 million podcasts, only 23% of those people had published an episode in the last 90 days,
I heard that.
which means there's only 500,000 people that are continuing to publish. And it's an even larger number who don't make it past episode like 7 because
Yeah,
they just
and
give up.
they give up, and we were really excited. We're over 100 episodes. We're over 5,000 downloads. We're over, we get all of our Buzzsprout celebratory emails and shoot
Yes.
fireworks at us and things. It's very exciting. It's the little things, right? And it is sticking with it. People
100%.
give up so fast.
I had noticed like once I made it to episode 20, 25, because I was always really concerned about, because most of my show is interviews. I have very little solo episodes, but I was always concerned like I'm going to run out of guests. I'm not going to be able to find someone, and it was super scary. And once I started hitting that like 2025 mark, then the podcast agencies start picking up on that and they start reaching out to you. So I started getting an influx of guests coming to me, and I got to pick and choose like, okay, you'd be a good fit, probably not so much. But because I've interviewed some people who created these agencies, and they specifically look for podcasters who have a set number of shows to pitch to, because they don't want to send it to someone who's got 3 episodes and might not post a 4th.
Because then their client's not going to renew with them.
Right.
Well, and I noticed also once I hit 100 episodes, the quality of people being sent my way went up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Like before that, I network and speak a lot, so I meet a ton of people. The other thing you can decide is a do or don't is for probably a good 3 months, because I wanted the chunk of content. We were dropping 2 episodes a week.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of work.
How to kill your assistant in one fell swoop. Like, she was ready to kill me. But we were doing that. But it does change. If you stick with it like anything else, it gets easier, it gets better, and it starts to work.
I mean, I think the fact that you have over 100 episodes, that puts you in like the top 1% of all podcasts.
I'm gonna have to look that up and start using that.
I think that, I'm not positive, so don't quote me on it. Nick
You
did
can
not
look it up
say
for me
this.
and let me know. Say
But
Nick told me.
It's something like that where most people, it drops off so dramatically. The people who actually make it to episode 10, there's like 80% drop off before they hit episode 20. And like when you get down to it, if you stick through for like 30 episodes, 50 episodes, you're one of very few that are still doing it.
Here's the trick for me to doing that. I don't do the parts that I'm not good at doing or I don't like doing. I don't do the tech. I like talking to people. Someone else doesn't like talking to people. She likes doing the tech.
Yeah.
And you want to talk to people. I know it's dinner time and she snuck upstairs. But that's exactly it, right? Do the part that you do best and hire for the rest of it.
Absolutely.
And then you can continue. I know, I'm gonna throw the blanket over. All right. Well, we've been going, and evidently Daisy needs dinner. So we will wrap up. Yes, we will wrap up the episode. If people want to get a hold of you and learn how you can help them grow their podcast, get a hold of your show that I know you're in the process of upgrading, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, the best way would be on my website. So it is just 95podcast.com. I spell it out to make it really confusing for everybody, spelling out numbers. So it's NINEFIVE podcast.com. And that'll basically put you right at my podcast page. Social media links are all there. But if you are interested in actually launching a podcast, it's the same thing, 95podcast.com/start. And you can book a call directly with me and we can talk about the show you want to start, or maybe you've put it off and now after listening, you're like, I need to go relaunch that. Let's hop on a call and talk about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing me on. After listening to several of your episodes and the guests you've had, I was really excited. The conversations are very fun. So I appreciate you bringing me on and sharing my love of podcasting.
Absolutely. It's a big deal. It's a new way to get to meet people. So I'm having a good time. So.